Okay, we are live on YouTube, I believe. So, welcome everyone to our first live Q&A with the monster in charge, John Kovaleski. And he is the man at the top here at Monster Fight Club. Now, this isn't our first Q&A. We've done a few others, a couple with me, one with Dan Schlery, our sales and marketing manager. So, he is there. Now I got to turn this off. Welcome. There we go. And so we're ready to go. I've got some questions that are lined up for John, and we have hopefully some questions from you guys as well. So let's go ahead and get John on over here to the stream. And you are now live, John. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. It's a wonderful warm day here in Virginia. So yesterday was 82, which was ridiculously warm, and now I'm hearing that we might have snow tomorrow morning. So that should be fun. So seems about right.
Did you say 82 degrees?
It was 82. Yeah, it was great.
I think we are supposed to get 11 is going to be the low. 23, I think, is going to be the high today. And wind chill is going to, at some point today, take it down to -3 for us. But
gotcha. And you're Central Washington, right?
Yes. Yeah. Central Washington up here in the Pacific Northwest. But we are certainly not warm right now. But I love seasons. So while I appreciate the 82-degree weather, especially in Virginia, 82 degrees down in Florida would be like miserable for me, but 82 where you are is pretty good.
You say that until the summertime, and then it gets miserable. It can get miserable in the summertime.
Anytime the heat,
it's like that Washington D.C. heat. It's like sticky and everything else.
Nasty. Anytime you're near the weather, right?
Cool. So what you got for me?
All right. Well, first of all, this is just basically a get to know MFC pretty much. I mean, we can do some questions. The first question I have for you, and then we'll field some of the questions that pop up in the chat. So if you're watching, go ahead and make sure you start putting those questions into the chat, and we'll see them as we go, and we'll come back to them. So the first question I had for you is, MFC is just 4 years old. We just celebrated our 4-year anniversary. So I think a good place to start is, what were you doing before Monster Fight Club was born?
So I've had an interesting life, I guess, if you go back and start looking at what I was doing before. Prior to this, some of you guys might know Gale Force 9. Gale Force 9 was a company that I started in the basement of my house 24 years ago now. Because when we started Monster Fight Club, it was 20 years to the day, roughly, when I left Gale Force 9. And then, so we started Gale Force 9. And when we first started, we were an accessories company. So we were one of the first, if not the first, that was doing anything with a laser in the gaming market. So we started by making tokens and markers and templates and all that kind of stuff before any of that stuff was anything. So all of the old Warhammer guys back in the day, they were getting their multi templates and their arcs of visibility and all that. That was all Gale Force 9 stuff back then. And that came from a buddy of mine from college who was an engineer, and he bought himself one of these new fangled crazy lasers when they first came out. And unlike today, where you can get a laser for $1,000 that can do something, back then they were about $35,000. So it was a lot of money, and half the power and everything else. So he bought this thing, and I thought it was very cool. And my previous career to this is I was in the merchant marine, sailing on ships. So I had a little bit of extra income, and I had a lot of free time on my hands in between vessels. So I thought that it was a very cool toy. So I went and got myself one too.
That's cool. And
with the grand idea that we were going to probably set up some sort of little trophy shop or something and do laser engraving. And when the person that was going to help me with that decided they didn't want to do that, like, I have this very expensive toy that's just kind of sitting in the basement, trying to figure out what to do with it. And my really good friend and classmate, Matt York, back in the day, he was he was really into Warhammer, like stupid into Warhammer, and he was one of the guys that was winning all the grand tournaments and everything else.
Yeah.
So he was using me as his proxy player. So he would beat me up with every possible army combination as he was practice. And then we ended up, he saw the toy and he's like, ooh, maybe we can make some really cool little shields for my Skaven army. So we started custom making Skaven shields, and we also had a Bretonnian army, so we ended up cutting the Bretonnian wedge before there were Bretonnian wedges. It was a rule, but no one was really making trays, moving trays and stuff. And so we started, between him being an engineer and me having time, we started sitting around and putting stuff together. And it was interesting because we decked out his armies, and he would go and win one of the GW GTs or something. Yeah. It was kind of like having Michael Jordan wear your shoes. Here's the winning army. Here's the guy who did it. What's that? And so that's kind of where Gale Force 9 got started. And cool. So people started looking at that. That was back. So I'm going to date myself. Yeah, this goes back a while. Back when GW had the battle tour, and they had their van that they would drive up and down the East Coast. Yeah. And that's where I met Sean Swaggart, who was a buddy of mine who ended up coming and being my number 2 at Gale Force 9 forever.
Yeah, that's cool.
And it was interesting because one of the good things about being in the Merchant Marine back then was, you would work 6-7 months, and then you'd be off 3 or 4 months, and then you'd go back out to work and do other things. Yep. So in that time off, I ended up, he says, hey, do you want to ride around with the battle tour for a while? And I'm like, oh, that'd be great.
Let me think about that. Yes.
Yeah, so I learned to be an outrider, and kind of hung out with that. But the really cool bit of that was, every day that you were doing something with the battle tour, you were getting swag money. Yeah. From GW. So I ended up with a ridiculous amount of swag money because I rode around with them for almost a month.
Oh, wow.
And it was a lot of fun. But I learned the business side of gaming during that time. And one of the things we were doing was making, at the time we were making the multi-templates, which was the 3-inch circle, the 5-inch circle, the flamer, everything was all built into one thing. And I started, my guerrilla marketing was I would leave a couple behind at every store we went to visit, and it had the website on it. And over time, people started, pinging us, and later on, I would, Sean would go out and he would take them too, and he would leave one behind for me, as things were going on, and I could tell where he was by the orders that were coming in on the website, because I was like, oh, he's up the Northeast, or he's down south, because you could kind of see where the things were coming. So that was very cool.
Old school GPS. That's funny. Yeah.
Yep. And then we ended up doing we created a thing called the War Without End League system that we designed and pitched it to GW, and GW thought it was pretty cool. So they ended up buying the idea, and we were manufacturing the boards that they would hang on. So one looked like a big, really cool shield. Another one was a kind of a 40K pyramid thing that we did, very sci-fi. And the cool thing about that is they would buy these boards by the 100, and they would send them out to the stores, and we would, we'd send them out there. And another thing that we did that I thought was pretty smart this is pre-internet, really. There wasn't, we were just starting, the internet was just starting to become a thing. Yeah. So one of the things we did was every store that bought into the system, we gave them a bunch of coupon codes so they could type in the name of the player and whatnot that was doing, and we would laser engrave little cool name tags for everybody that they were going through. And so you would have these stores all over the place that would log into our website to do this. And I knew they were a store of good standing. I knew they were, because they had one of these things. The only way to get one was to get it through GW.
Yeah.
And so we just made everything on the website at a retailer discount, and they started buying into it.
That's awesome.
The next thing I knew, I was making more money coming in than I was doing shipping.
Yeah.
And then we took it a little more serious.
That's pretty cool. I remember playing 40K when before, I don't know if it was before those templates came out, but when I first got introduced to those templates, the grenades and the bigger blasts and the flamer templates, I thought that was the coolest thing because they were already that translucent like orange color, and you could paint. They had ridges on it for flames and all that kind of stuff. You could paint ridges on it and all that kind of stuff. But I thought it was a neat thing, and I didn't realize until now that was Gale Force 9 that made those.
So while the orange ones were somebody else after us.
Oh, they were. Okay.
We were doing clear when we started off.
Clear.
And then every time a new effect came, we'd make an effect token, and we were the guys that basically there weren't a lot of tokens and markers and stuff in Warhammer until we got involved, and then it got a little ridiculous at one point when there were things everywhere.
Yeah.
And then when GW did a lot of transition, and Privateer Press became the thing for a while. Mm-hmm. I pitched to Privateer the idea of doing tokens for them, and we ended up doing tokens for War Machine. Yeah. And for a few months, that was like the number one selling thing through Alliance game distribution, were the tokens and stuff.
That's cool.
So they embraced them, and then we just kept running with it and coming up with new things. Right. And then eventually we got excited, and we wanted to do our own game eventually. So that's back when let's see, what was the show? Oh, that was Spartacus. Yeah. So the Stars television series was on, and Spartacus was on, and Sean and I were like, oh, we should totally do this really cool game for that. And Aaron Dill was involved with that too, which was fun because he was one of our game designers. Yeah. So the three of us were coming up with ideas. So we're like, how do you get permission to do a game for somebody else? I had no idea. Oh, wow. I did a little bit of research and figured out that there was a licensing show in Vegas every year that you could go to and try to get permission for things. And I ended up, it just happened to be like 2 weeks after this idea jumped in that we had the idea. So I'm like, well, hell, I'll go to Vegas. So jumped on a plane, went out to see what was going on, walked around. And I remember walking in and seeing this 60-foot banner of Spartacus going to the ceiling over this one booth. And I walked over and I introduced myself, and it turned out that the Cabinet Entertainment, I think it was Paradox at the time before they became Cabinet, was helping with licensing with Stars, and it turned out that the owner of that was a guy from Scandinavia who used to import board games, and he was involved with Cornopia and Warzone and all that stuff back in the day. So he knew the hobby. Yeah. And we were all kind of new to licensing. So I gave a pitch. He thought the idea was cool. We made a game, printed out a few thousand copies of it, took it to Gen Con with no marketing, no fanfare, no nothing. And set it up in the booth and tried to sell it. And the first day was the sales were not good. It was because nobody knew what we were doing. Right. And I think we sold a couple hundred of them or something. Yeah. And we're like, ooh, this could be bad as you're sitting around. But that night when we were walking around, people were playing it in the halls. That's cool. And you could see my thing, and it started getting a buzz. And the next day we sold like 5 times more. Oh wow. And the third day, we had a couple distributors come up to us and say, hey, this thing's getting some buzz. Yeah. We're interested. And that was the start. And then, a dozen games later and everything else, from Star Trek Ascendancy to, Firefly, the game. And, and all the other ones. We just kept working our way through the list and every time we did a game, we tried to do something that was different from what we did before. We didn't want to just take the same thing and keep redoing it. We wanted to kind of innovate. So we were able to go through everything, and that was a good time. And we learned a lot from that. And, you know, some games were better than others, but we had a lot of that were really exciting. And then Star Trek Ascendancy is one of my favorites. It's one of the last ones we did. But a couple of years ago, I'm sitting here watching South Park, and the kids are at the game convention episode where they went there. And there's Cartman going, and here we are, Star Trek Ascendancy. And I was like, holy shit, we made it. And that was, all right, now you're a thing. You're pop culture now.
Yep.
So that's where we ended up. And then a few years later, as things were going on, Sean passed. So things got a little bit different here at the office. And I think everybody was getting to a place where we felt like we wanted to change. And then, early 2018, 20 years, coming up on the 20-year anniversary of starting Gale Force 9, I was like, I think I've been doing this enough.
Yeah.
So I let the guys in the office know that I was thinking about leaving. And everybody's like, well, if you're not going to be here anymore, then I don't want to be here anymore. And I'm like, what are you guys going to do? I said, I don't know. We'll do something else. So the joke was I was going to go away and start a fight club. That was the joke. So it's like, well, what are you going to do with your time? I don't know. I'm going to start a fight club. And Monster Fight Club ended up as a name that ended up sticking because I was sitting here trying to think out what I was going to do next.
Yeah.
And the idea of Monster Fight Club, because what is an adventuring party if not a group of people that form up a club to go out and fight monsters?
Yeah.
So true. Monster Fight Club was the name. And back in my GF9 days, we did a lot of Battlefield in the Box things where we were doing terrain, and that was something I always wanted to really expand on and flush.
Yeah.
So I said, all right, so let's go ahead and see if we can do a Kickstarter for that. So Aaron and I put together the Monster Scenery Kickstarter, and it was all successful, and we ended up making lots of trees and hills and rocks and whatnot. And it seems like the tabletop crowd and the RPG guys embraced it, which is great. And so now we're having lots of fun seeing all the social media people and streams and Twitch things going on. And it's like, hey, there's our trees, there's our rocks, there's our hills. So that was all kind of fun.
Yep.
And because we had made so many games in the past, there was always going to be another game. We just wasn't sure where that was going to be. And Aaron ended up in between companies. He had some time before, so he left Gale Force 9 before I left. And in that time, he was working on Tentacle Town. So he had this concept for Tentacle Town of a peninsula on the corner of a piece of land where the founders came in to establish a new town, only to be attacked by giant tentacles from the ocean as they were doing it. And it was just this silly concept that was fun to play. So we put it together and tried another Kickstarter to see how that would do. And it worked out. And this is, at GF9, I always stayed away from Kickstarters. Back when it was my call, I was like, why would we do a Kickstarter? Why wouldn't you just, support your distributor, support your store, do all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah. And
what it ended up is when I started doing games, there was like 50 games a month that were coming out.
Yeah.
Which isn't, that is something that the games come out, stores can look at them, they can actually evaluate every game, decide if they're good or not. And then if they're good, you buy them. If they're not, you don't.
Yep.
But today there are months where you got 1,500 new games that come out on a given month, and it's like impossible to even know what's out there.
Absolutely.
And the distribution model changed heavily with the Kickstarter stuff going through because they had so much stuff to look at that they were not willing to just buy everything anymore.
Yep.
Now, if it wasn't a top 50, you really didn't do it. And then Asmodee came in and started buying everybody up and putting the stuff together. And so it got real easy for a store to just carry the top few games that were out there.
Yep.
And then a cutting edge store would spend some time to see what was hot. And the only way you really knew if something was hot was kind of Board Game Geek and kind of word of mouth stuff that was out there.
Yeah.
But in reality, what was hot was a Kickstarter.
Mm-hmm.
And you saw a Kickstarter, and then Simon started doing these amazingly huge Kickstarters and everything else. And it changed the industry forever. Everything just kind of changed up. So the distributors would kind of come in and say, all right, if nobody knows your game and they really don't know you because the industry knows me, but Monster Fight Club was brand new.
Yeah.
So they're like, all right, so it's hard for us to justify stepping up and buying thousands of copies of the game that we don't know or not.
Right.
And we were actually told, if you had a successful Kickstarter, that would help.
Wait, do you know who I am? I
mean, and that's kind of what ended up happening.
That's funny. Oh man, it's comical. It's comical on one side because they're looking at somebody that's been part of the industry since since way back when with GW, had your own company, and now you have a new company, and they're looking at the logo, maybe not your face, and thinking, I don't know you from Adam. Why should I buy any of your games? Because you don't have any track record. And you're like, well, no, I do a little bit of research.
But a lot of that, when I started Gale Force 9, it wasn't, I never wanted to be social media. I never wanted to be on camera. That was never my intent.
Yeah.
And Gale Force 9 wasn't even supposed to be a real company. Mm-hmm. It was a hobby that got out of hand.
Yeah.
That got bigger and bigger and bigger, and then suddenly we embraced it.
So that's a question that actually ties into that. What you just said kind of ties into one of the questions that we got in the chat, and the question was, what was the catalyst for getting into the hobby of quote unquote army men toys for adults? So what you just said was, that's not what I originally. Well, maybe this is too much rewording, but it's not necessarily where I wanted it to go, but it just kind of ended up going there. So what was that catalyst that? I'm going to go even farther back. Okay.
So I'm going to go back. Let's see, Star Wars popped out.
Yeah.
So, when Star Wars came out, I think I was 7.
Mm-hmm.
7 years old. And that was an interesting bit because Star Wars came out, and for some reason, my mom didn't want me to see Star Wars. Maybe it was too high or something, or too grown up at the time.
Yeah.
So I remember the consolation prize was going to see Pete's Dragon, the first edition of Pete's Dragon, Disney back in the day.
The cartoon, the animation, yeah.
So Pete's Dragon. I think it was live action with animation mixed with it.
Oh, okay.
It was one of those, almost like a Mary Poppins sort of thing back in the day. But all I remember, and these are vague, shadowy memories, was that I told my mom I had to go to the bathroom, and so I snuck into Star Wars, and I am sitting in the aisle, watching Star Wars, thinking it's amazing. And about 20 minutes later, the movie stopped, and the light turned on in the theater, and you hear my mom going, "John, are you in here?"
Oh no! Oh man!
And the guy, I just remember this older guy going, pointing to me sitting on the floor, and that was back when public spankings were a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was publicly spanked, but that was my introduction to Star Wars, and then later on, my parents had mercy on me and let me actually go and watch it. And then I watched it like a million times. And then the first piece of terrain I ever built was, I had the old Kenner, 3-inch figures that everybody was playing with back then.
Yeah.
And Better Homes and Gardens had an article on how to build Hoth. And it was, go to your local store, get some white styrofoam foam, stack it up and build. And that was the first thing I ever built, was Hoth for my Star Wars action figures. And then few years later, I remember being sick home one day, and I had a ridiculous amount of plastic Army men, the little cheap ones you buy in a bag.
Yeah,
I'm talking like a bucket,
Yeah.
you know, and I used to play with those all the time. And one day when I was sick at home, one of my fondest memories of my dad was he used to work shift work. He was, I think at the time he was U.S. Was he Customs? No, I think he was Secret Service at the time. But he was home that day when I was sick. And he's like, come on, we're going to play something. So he breaks out the Army men with me, and we spent like 3 hours setting up the living room with plastic Army men. So, you know, he was the grays, I was the greens. We had everything set up. You had the little blue ones, the spotters you would put out in the different places. And we had a suction cup gun. And that was how we would shoot the figures, as you would aim and you would take the shot. We would alternate. And then every time you blew up 5 Army men, then you were allowed to take a sock rolled up in a ball, and that was your grenade. So you were allowed to throw the grenade. And then every time you wiped out 20 in a pile, you got to airstrike with a pillow. And whoever the last man standing was the winner. And it ended up, I was wiping him out all over the place, and he would keep shooting me. I'm like, you don't have any more figures. He's like, I do. You just don't see them. Because my father was also a Marine Corps sniper, you know, back in the early days. And he's like, I got a sniper.
Yeah.
And someone else would go out. And then at the end, there he was. Sniper was hiding in the plant pot over, looking out of the dirt. Sure enough. And that was my introduction into toy soldiers. And then years later, I got into D&D and kind of messed around with that. But, you know, back then it wasn't cool to play D&D. It wasn't, you know, you kind of had to be a lot of that was kind of stealthy, and stealth nerd. You know, I played football, I played basketball, I played baseball. My D&D was on the down low, you know, in the back. And then when I went to the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, it still wasn't super cool. But we had a scuba club, which had its own little private space. And a lot of us were D&D players, so we would hide out in the scuba club and play D&D at the academy. And then that's where I met Matt, and then we ended up, he was really into Warhammer. And so he actually gave me a high elf army back in the day when we were starting to do stuff. So, you know, it was something we got on eBay that was, you know, all beat up and whatnot. So I had this, but in there were a couple of these space-looking dudes. I'm like, what are these green space things? He goes, oh, they're 40K Dark Angels. So I have like
Dark Angels.
30,000 points of Dark Angels now.
What?
I have a ridiculous. I have the old Metal Thunderhawk and all that. So I got really into it.
Man.
And
my Dark Angels army got stolen.
But because I was a maker, I kept, you know, we had a laser, so, you know, I would buy old beat up rhinos that were ripped to crap, and I would make new armor, and I would my whirlwinds were custom made, where I laser cut the box for the top like rocket launchers and had them on top, and that's kind of where all this came. And then,
that's cool.
You know, when you started going to shows and people were like, hey, I'll give you $40 for that guy, I'm like, sure. And you go make another one.
Wait a minute. I can do this. That's funny. That's great. That's a great story too. And it's a great memory for you and your dad. And that's super cool. I think we found the next Monster Fight Club product though. It's a print and play. You just buy a box of Army men and you use your entire living room. And we just have to come up with rules. That's awesome. That's very cool. All right. Now we've already kind of touched on this. You talked about being a merchant marine. We talked about kind of your background, and at PAX Unplugged, you guys brought with you a container ship that was kind of a labor of love for you, and you had all the containers and all that kind of stuff. So I'm using that as kind of a lead into this question. And the question is, how does your background influence your vision for the products that Monster Fight Club offers?
So I think I've always liked ships. I've always liked water. I've always liked all of that sort of stuff. And I remember playing with Rackham stuff back in the day. And AT-43 came out. And they had their containers and stuff for those. And they had, whatever the ape clan was. They were like, I don't even remember the names of the different stuff. But I would see that and go, that is really cool. And those were kind of some of the first pre-painted figures that were coming out. They weren't like, Whiz Kids is at one level, back when Mage Knights and stuff first came out.
Right.
But these were like, wow, these are like hobby level. They were painted really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
They were expensive, but not crazy expensive.
Right.
And as you get older, you learn, at least I learned, that when you start out when you're young, you got lots of time and no money. And then over time, it kind of shifts and goes the other way.
Yeah.
And I wanted things, I enjoyed the sitting there and playing with stuff, but I didn't have the time to really paint and really get into stuff anymore. Mm-hmm. So it was, if I can have a whole painted army already, that would be super great. I can either do that or hire painters, and I did some of that too. Mm-hmm. But as things were going through. So I got really into the container stuff. And then when the containers were out, because I was in the Merchant Marine, and the very first ship that I was on as a cadet was the President Harrison, which was a C-8 container ship for the old American President lines. And I always thought that would be super cool to have a container ship. And then I had the opportunity when we were working on Cyberpunk. Ready Player One was out recently, the movie. Yeah. And so you saw the container ship high rises or the container high rises and using containers for everything. And all of that was really cool. So I was like, we need to make containers. So, the first container that we ended up doing, and I really like tinkering and making things. So we ended up building this container ship or this container. And I love when Hasbro, back in the early days of Hasbro, their original CEO used to use the word toyetic. And you're like, what's toyetic? And toyetic to them was a toy is meant to be played with, not just looked at. It's not a collectible you put in a box and put it on a shelf. It's something you actually can sit there and move around and have things with. So I always liked making toys, things that you could play with. So when we had the container idea, one of the things that used to annoy me with the Rackham ones is there was no way to really stack them, or what do you do with them other than use them as terrain? So when I came up with this idea, I said, wouldn't it be cool if they work like Legos? Because then you can just sit there. And so many prototypes later, start sitting here and making these things, and you can build really cool forts and stuff. Yeah. And then I was like, all right, this is really cool, but it's a pain in the butt to ship because you put 10 of these in a box, it takes up a lot of room. Yep. So we came up with a way of
plopping them apart.
Down so they pops apart. And these are production samples, which is really cool. So these are the ones, the tops come off, sides come off, and so these things break down so that they are completely, they're completely flat. Yeah. So, and then I realized that if you had different colors, you can put the pieces together and start doing really cool things. Yeah. So the Cyberpunk Kickstarter we did, we wanted to include a container with everybody, and that unfortunately was the thing that kept dragging us on because they couldn't get the engineering right. Right. They could build a container, but the pinch fit to get these things to work correctly was really, really difficult to get that just right. So that was one of the big delays, and now that's all been resolved, and production is underway, and they're supposed to be shipping at the end of next month. So all of that's in a good place, and then they'll get them out in the world. But now that we have this really cool container, I can't just have one container. You got to have multiple containers. So you got to So then you start building forts and stuff with them to see what you can do.
Yeah.
But then thinking back to Ready Player One, well, if you could sit down and break these out like this, why isn't there a hole for a door? Why isn't there a window?
Mm-hmm.
Why isn't there a gun turret on the top? And then it starts getting ridiculous, but that's what you do. And you just start expanding and getting everything. And so part of that whole thing was, all right, now you've got all these really cool containers and you spread them out all over the place and they look really, really neat. So what can you do with a container? You can build a fort. You can build fortifications. You can do Walking Dead zombie stuff with fences and barbed wire and all that kind of stuff, which is really cool. But in the back of my head, it's always, I want to do this really cool thing. I want to do this really cool thing. And with the success of Gale Force 9 and then later Monster Fight Club now and stuff we were doing, I have been really fortunate to be able to get the toys I need to do what I need to do. And I say toys, CNC machines, large format 3D printers, giant UV printers that put color on things. So I have a very cool workshop in the back that we make everything with. We do our own injection molding of stuff. And as time goes on, I now have almost 28 years of manufacturing experience. And every time you learn a new little thing, it adds on to it. So between all the laser stuff I did and everything else, I kept thinking about how could I do something that I could flat pack, and how do you sell a container ship? You think about the old GI Joe aircraft carrier back in the day, the 7 foot long, and I was actually fortunate to have one. I got a used one later on. So that was super cool. And I always it was always been in my head that I wanted to do this. Yeah. And then you're also like, how do you convince people to get lots and lots of containers? Fill up a container ship and make the ship available. Why not?
Yeah.
So that ridiculous container ship we did, the way we made it playable on the table is we built the house and we built the bow as it comes through. And we made it so that the decks could be lifted off and you can actually get inside and play and do this other kind of stuff. Yeah. But then for the section in between the house and the stern, or the house and the bow as it went through, we just did cross sections, and every cross section held 50 containers. That's how many containers would go in a cross section stacked up like this. And you go one, you add the next, and you add the next. And the one we took to the show was, we had a 4x8 table at the show, and it went diagonal, took up the whole thing, going all the way to the side. But it is the right scale to be a small container ship, even though it's for gaming, it's ridiculous. And you put it out there, but it's neat because that idea was super, super cool. We wanted to do it. And then during the pandemic, when everything was going on, I had the opportunity to live stream a game with Mike Pondsmith and Team Monster, and we sat around and we did this game and it was completely unsolicited that Mike had us go after a container ship. That was the mission. So we stole an AV4. That was kind of the mission. We met up, we stole an AV4, we got a thing, we flew out and got on this ship, and it was AI driven, and we were fighting the ship as we were trying to take out they had to hack into it and take over the computer and do all this other stuff. And it was a really, really cool story. Kept resonating with me. And I told Mike, I said, I'm going to build that damn ship. And sure enough, Amberlin became a thing.
Did he get to see it? Did he get to see it at PAX?
He didn't see it in person, but he saw it online and whatnot. Yeah. Let's see. So Gen Con, we're going to have our booths together. Yeah. So we will have that there. And we'll be playing with it. But then you start thinking about it. It's like, okay, so if you have this ship, what do you need? Well, you need a really big mat to put under it. Yeah. So you got this ocean mat. So, okay, cool. So you got an ocean mat, but our mats usually are double-sided. So what can I put on the other side?
Right.
I'm like, let's put it next to a dock.
Yep.
So we left the water running down. We parked the ship. So now you got this dock. So, well, we already make really cool fences. So here's some really cool fences to go around. So let's put the fences around. Let's stack the containers. got to build a crane. So I've actually got a crane being worked on right now. The prototype's underway that comes and moves the stuff. And if you're going to take the containers off and put them down, they need to sit on a chassis. So we've created the chassis. So that's going to sit on that. If you're going to do that, well, you need some sort of a semi on the front to grab it and pull it. So we made the front.
So this is
kind of funny how I'm making semis for cyberpunk before other things.
Yeah.
And then we're like, well, what can we put in there? And so we started sculpting, and these will be available really soon. These are some of the early prototypes, but the motorcycles and stuff that are running with things. So we've got motorcycles, we've got vehicles underway. And of course, I think of, this needs to fit inside the container. It's funny how that works. It's funny how I can get a whole bunch of bikes on the inside of the thing. I want everything to be modular and be able to be used with all kinds of sort of stuff.
I guess from an outside looking in, it's almost what's been bouncing around in my head as you've been going through explaining all this is the snowball business method, because you start with one thing and then it just keeps getting bigger and bigger.
I would say my number one flaw myself is focus. I want to do everything all the time for everything. Right. And I need to take little bite-sized things and focus on projects. It's like, ooh, piece of candy, you take off and you're like, ooh, piece of candy, and you turn and you keep going off and doing these things, using a Family Guy reference there. And so, we did the Cyberpunk game, and we're super excited to finally get that to be delivered.
Yeah.
And at one point, between pandemic and shipping container issues and prices and everything else, at one point, I think we had 4 projects not delivered and yet. Yeah. And that got stressful and scary as things go on. Super. So with that said, now, we got 2 of them finished up really quick. The Cyberpunk's about to ship here in the next month.
Yeah.
And then right after that, the following month is when the Borderlands gets shipped out to everybody. And then what we're going to do at that point is we are going to focus on what we have. I'm going to stop doing new stuff for a little bit. And we're going to expand on the universes that we already did.
Yeah. Because
there is so much that should be done with Cyberpunk. There is so much to be done there. And then I say that there is also the distraction of the Witcher figures that we've been doing, because they're just cool. You have to do them. They're neat. So because we can do those here, we're sculpting those, we're making those. I think we have like 40 or 50 of them now that are the things getting up after that. So that's kind of where we're at.
That's cool.
And then I have one other little side project that's been in my head for about a year now, that the nice thing about this one is it doesn't take a huge team of people. It takes some talented artists to put together the concepts. And that's something that I'll probably talk about in the next month or so. Yes. But there's some really cool things coming down the pipe. But for Cyberpunk, we got lots for Cyberpunk coming out. We got, we're going to start showing off pictures of the AV4s that we prototyped up, and we're going to tool those into plastic and have some really cool AV4 models. Because I want flyers, I want flying drones, I want the motorcycles, I want the cars, I want people, rappelling down the side of buildings and doing all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And between that, Metropolis and all the other things that are out there, I think right now the toy box has everything in it to do some really, really cool stuff. And so we're going to focus on what we got and just keep expanding on it.
Yep. All right. So we do have a couple more questions, and I have one more question for you. We're at about the 45-minute mark now, so I think we've got enough time to fill this in. One person, Vince, in the chat made a comment, and I don't know how open you want to be with it, but I'll put it out there, and if you don't want to answer it, you don't want to answer it.
Sure.
Says he knows that, and this is his question, he knows that China has been handling production for the figures, but could you foresee Monster Fight Club producing miniatures and scenery domestically in the future? Now, you already kind of touched on it by saying that we produce the Witcher miniatures, so there's a little bit of a misperception there, I guess.
So all of the Cyberpunk stuff that we are doing, and here's there's a tray full of awesomeness right here.
Yeah.
And this is about half of what is done right now.
Yep.
As we start going through. All of that is made or being made right here.
Yeah.
Right here, Earlysville, Virginia, which is, Earlysville is Charlottesville. You have Charlottesville, you have the airport, which is Earlysville, but it's still called, Charlottesville Airport. Yeah. And we are, 2 minutes down the road from the airport in our facility and stuff that goes through. So we are making all of those here. We are making the Witcher models here. What it comes down to is that, the plan, especially after COVID, is I don't ever want to get caught again where I have to rely on things that I can't do myself. Anytime that I've run into problems in my life is things that I've relied on, things outside of my direct control that fall apart. Anything under my direct control, I can focus on and do stuff there. So I would rather do that here in-house. But there are some things you can't do in-house. When you have you do a Borderlands Kickstarter that, has 10,000 backers, and
right.
when you do the math, you're like, that's 2 million figures. It's yeah. Literally just how big a pile is that?
Yeah.
When you start looking at it, and you're like, I don't think we can make that in-house.
Right.
Because when we started, all of those things were being made. I wanted to do them in-house. Yeah. So we have, like some of the custom stuff we did Tiny Tina and some other custom figures that we did ourselves in-house. But then when you sat down and just the sheer quantities of things that have to be done, and then we haven't announced this yet, but a major partner has stepped up and has taken on global distribution of Borderlands, and they're going to do translations and all kinds of stuff. So the numbers got really big really quick.
That's cool.
And suddenly we're just like, we physically can't do it at our place. So then I went out and got a partner that I knew was capable of doing things out there in the past. And a lot of it too is, at one point, price of shipping containers, they got crazy. They got up to like $30,000, $40,000 for a single container, where they used to be $6,000.
Right.
So that got crazy and out of hand. And at that point, you're like, you can't afford to do stuff overseas. But now that things have kind of reversed a little bit, prices have gotten down. I'm being very selective about what we do overseas and what we can do in house.
Yeah.
And I'm also trying to. We're keeping much more under our hat to make sure that we're not announcing things too soon, because I don't want to be in a position again where I tell people things are coming, and then it's got to get delayed 6 months because of things outside of my control.
Right.
I don't want that to happen. I would rather make announcements and say, hey, available now, or it is ready to ship. We just have to do it. And that is a much better place to be. Or you do some sort of a campaign where I want to do this really, really cool thing, and the tooling is going to cost $100,000, which is crazy sauce. But let's see if the community is excited enough to back it.
Sure.
And then, if that happens, then you do it, and then you run from there to see what you can do with it.
Yep.
But yeah, we are focusing on what we do well, and that's going to be Borderlands and Cyberpunk, and expanding on the stuff we're doing on The Witcher, and making more terrain and making cool gaming tables. Yeah. And that's what we're doing now.
That's cool. That's cool. All right, we're gonna end with this one. Well, a couple of things here. We had one guy asking about starting to sell STL files. I wanted to see if you wanted to say anything about that.
STL files, yes, and probably maybe. and I say that out loud. Things we're doing ourselves. We are in the middle of redesigning our website and everything right now, and putting that infrastructure in to be able to do that. I think, just the way technology is going and everything else that's out there, it's silly not to do the things that people are ripping you off on a daily basis. You go on to Etsy, and you go on to some of these other places, and there are people that are just taking what we do and just ripping it off verbatim, not even trying to be different, and making these things available. And there's enough people out there that are profiting from the hard work of other people.
Yeah.
That we should. I think it's going to end up a little bit like the music industry, where you can't stop it, so make it easy for people to do the right thing.
Yep.
And I think the way to do that is to make the files and stuff available.
Yeah.
And I think there's some real opportunities with that. And in the early days, I wasn't, and I say early days, even a couple of years ago, I wasn't excited about the idea of putting out files and seeing them on a table when the printers were not doing them justice.
Gotcha.
Because the quality of the figures were horrible.
Yeah.
And then Formlabs came out with their first Kickstarters, and now there are $500 printers that are 95% the quality of what a $100,000 3D printer can do.
Wow.
And when I see them on the tabletop, I'm like, you know what? They look every bit as good as the stuff that people are doing. So I think technology is now at the point where we should be making that available.
Yeah.
But I also believe that people are, and this is absolutely true about myself, are inherently lazy. Most people, and I say that in a good way. One of my business caveats I've always believed is if you cater to the laziness of others, you can make money. and if you look at it from the meat industry, it used to be, hey, you'd buy a cow or you'd raise a cow, and then you could buy a cow, and then you could buy a half a cow that a butcher would take care of for you. And then you're like, well, now they'll actually pack it for you.
Yeah.
Oh wait, they'll actually cut it up into little pieces and they'll season it for you. And then restaurants came because they'll cook it for you. And so now and if you look at that even from a hobby point of view, it's happened.
Yeah.
There are, it used to be you had to make your own terrain.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were places that you would get model kits and build terrain.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had places that would make really cool plastic terrain that you would have to assemble and paint and do stuff.
Yep.
But then we started doing the pre-painted stuff, and people were like, it's good enough for what I want to do.
Yep.
But it's also not so gummed up that if I want to take it to the next level, I could still sit there and paint it and put my stuff on it.
Yep.
And so, if you're going to ask people to sit down and paint your figures and make it all gorgeous when they go and game in a store, I kind of felt like they shouldn't be playing on plywood and paper cutouts and stuff. And you want your battlefield to look as good as your models.
Yeah.
And I do think that the hobby in general, the better the table looks, especially in a store setting, everybody goes to the common denominator.
Yep.
And if you go to a place where everybody's unpainted or primed and they're using, Coke cans as terrain and everything else,
I used to use hymnals as terrain, okay? I played in my church, and
yeah.
all we had was a big stack of hymnals. So those hymnals were step hills.
well, in the early GW books, that's how they said to make a table.
Yeah.
Take your books, put them underneath the green cloth.
Yep. Exactly.
And you would do it, and then the Necromunda terrain came out. I'm sure I had inspiration for Metropolis from my Necromunda days.
Oh yeah.
And looking at that stuff. And you're just like, how can you make it better? How can you take the next step? How can you do all of that?
Right.
So that's kind of how we ended up where we were going.
Cool.
And in reality, all of the stuff that we've really made, with very rare exceptions, has been, I want this for my table. It doesn't exist. Or where it does exist, it's just not very good in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so I would try to do it better. Or I would just say, no, I'm going to do it this way. And then as technology kind of catches up with it, from lasers to unpainted wood to, UV colored wood to, to stamped or whatever it happens to be. And now, we're doing 2.5D, which is something we haven't started sharing with people yet. And I know a couple of other people have tried to do this in the past, and it was something I was just like, did I have a need for it? And I didn't. But then once I did it for myself, I was like, oh, this is cool. So, for the cyberpunk models, we started using the same tech that we did to make our buildings, and we started making bases.
Yeah.
So we're taking the bases we have, and we're able to put texture and color and stuff on the bases.
Yeah.
And so, and what's really cool about it is the way the systems work. We can print basically a grayscale layer down on the thing and just primer, because the primer that you put down, the white layer, all the ink on UV printers it's translucent. So in order to get good quality pop of color, you have to have a white layer underneath it. Whether you're printing on a white painted piece of metal, or you're printing on, if you print on glass, it will look like stained glass. But then that last layer they put on top of it is this white layer, so that when you look at it from the back side, you see the color and it pops out.
Yeah.
And then we discovered that if you take the white layer and put it on a gray gradient, black is 0, white is 100%.
Yeah.
You can get texture.
Right. That's cool.
So suddenly you're like, wow, I can feel the cobblestone. I can feel the brick. I can feel this. And it's something that we can do relatively easily. And with the new equipment I have, the printer I have in the back is 10 by 15 foot. It takes up an entire room. But you can put entire sheets of plywood in there and hit print.
Yeah.
And get graphics. But what's cool about that is you can do other things with it.
Yeah.
And I think what I've been very good at over my career is seeing things in other industries that were never really used in our industry.
Yeah.
And crossing over and seeing, hey, what can I do with that? I can't even go into like Lowe's or Home Depot anymore and walk around with, I don't see a grate, a grate cover.
Yeah.
I see, oh, that's a swamp pipe cover. That stuff, everything I see is there. I'm building an oil refinery right now out of PVC pipe and connectors that I'm 3D printing, and it's got catwalks. It's super cool, and this is all going to work with Metropolis. And if I already got a bow and a stern, I'm going to make the oil tanker part that goes in between it, so that can well up. So, and then if you have ships, then you got to have ways of blowing them up. So then I have to, all right, so now I need this kind of ship, and I need a drone, I need this and that. So I've got endless projects to work on as we move forward on things.
That's really cool. That's really cool. I've always kind of thought in the back of my head that the MFC offices were kind of like the Millennium Falcon of the industry. It doesn't look like much, as Han said, but it's got it where it counts. And walking through the different rooms in the offices, I'm like, holy crap, this is cool. And I haven't even been there since that new piece of furniture, we'll call it that, came in.
Yeah.
But it's something else. It's something else. All right. We're going to end with, we've got about 4 minutes here. 5 minutes. We'll say 5 minutes roundup. And the last question is a little bit more of just a personal question for you. What are your top 3 board games and or tabletop games? So the sky is the limit on what you can choose from. But if you only had the ability to play 3 games from now until eternity, what would those 3 choices be?
It's going to sound conceited to say, but I like the stuff I made myself.
Yeah. Well,
really do.
I don't think that's conceited.
I've played Firefly 100 times, and I'll play it 100 more.
Sweet.
I think Sons of Anarchy is one of the most underrated games that's ever gotten out, because I think we could have done a much better job on the marketing of Sons. And I'm also not sure. You look at that Venn diagram, Firefly fans and board gamers, that circle's a big overlap.
Yeah.
Big overlap.
Right.
Bikers and gamers, maybe not the crossover that I hoped it would be, but the way you play it is super cool, and I love everything about that game. I love the mechanics. I love how it works. I love the hidden weapons in your hand, that someone comes rolling into your zone and you look them in the eye and you reach down and you put, I dare you. I dare you to leave those people in my zone.
Yeah.
And you might have nothing.
Yeah.
But you might also have, 5 blocks ready to take down the other guys coming in.
Yeah.
And I think when we made games, games are fun to play, but I think like all media and all content, games, it's like watching a movie or watching a TV show. It is about the experience of playing it, and it needs to be beautiful, and you need to enjoy it while you're doing it. But I think what makes a really cool game is a year later. Remember that time that I critted and I took these 5 guys out and I took that dude on the top of the 6-story building and I threw him off and he flew down?
Yes.
Those are the moments you're trying to create.
Correct.
And that I dare you moment. or you aim to misbehave and you happen to be the guy that makes that delivery to do the win in Firefly, or in Spartacus where you have the lowliest gladiator and he happens to take out, Crixus out of nowhere, and it's like WWE excitement.
Yeah.
It's like,
it's cool.
Randy Orton out of nowhere. And it just happens. But those are the things you remember and talk about going forward.
That's great. That is
great.
And
so the games that I like playing are the games that we made. And a lot of that is because a lot of the games out there, I didn't have a lot of those experiences in the early days.
Right.
And unfortunately today, there are so many great games and stuff that are out there. I mean, even, the epic, like Gloomhaven and Twilight Imperium and, the games that have been out there, and even the newer stuff that's coming out. It is gorgeous. I love it. But I am old. I have more money now, but no time.
Yeah.
So I really have to focus on, what do I want to do? Would I rather play a game? If I have a bunch of buddies around, great, but I always don't have a bunch of buddies around.
Yeah.
Or would I rather make a container ship covered in things and have fun with my hobby?
Yeah.
And a lot of times I enjoy the challenge of making something that hasn't been done before.
The correct verbiage you were looking for is, you are vintage, you are not old.
I am vintage. Okay, we'll run with that.
We are vintage. We are not old.
Gotcha.
All right. Well, John, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to do this with us. I know the community is going to appreciate it for sure, and it's just great to have this kind of a peek behind the curtain, to use that reference of what goes on here at MFC and why, and kind of what the context is behind what we're doing now. And your vision is pretty much the lion's share of what we're doing here. So it's good to be able to talk to you and get your wording on how all this came about and where we're going. So I want to thank you for that. I'm just looking here to see if we have anything else.
So I just scrolled through there real quick.
Yeah.
Mitch, send me an email, john@monsterfightclub.com, about the CRM question you had.
Yeah. Yep. That's good. I didn't know if you would want to do that or not, but
I am open to talk to anybody anytime about anything.
Yep.
Whether I agree or want to go that direction is a whole nother conversation. But in this particular case, I happen to be neck deep in doing something that he just asked about. So good timing.
That's true. Good timing. That's all. That's about it. Another thing I wanted to hit on, we were talking about starting to sell STLs. Somebody else said that they didn't want STLs. Mitch, as a matter of fact, is the one that said that. The actual physical product, and so the clarification would be, we are not
both.
Yes, exactly. We're not going to go one route and not do the other. We're going to offer.
I think where I got sidetracked before when we were talking about things is, that cater to the laziness of other thing.
Yeah.
I am lazy. I don't want to sit there myself and print out 40 different figures for something. I would much prefer to not wait 35 days on a printer to get high-end stuff that I then have to break off of the endless amount of sprues that I have and then clean them and get them all perfect. I would rather buy something that isn't brittle, that has a good quality plastic, that's easily painted, that's in a good place that I can do that. And I know here in the office, you know, everything we make, you know, from 3D print to making the physicals when we're done, I personally do all of that myself, not by myself, but I make sure that I'm involved in all of those things all the time when we're going all the way through. And I know me personally, I would much prefer to have the plastic models that we're making ourselves. They're stronger, they paint better, the scale is more accurate. Part of the manufacturing process for us is there is some shrinkage when it goes from start to finish. So everything that we 3D print has to be a little bit bigger than it ends up with. So all of those things that we go through, we do that. So everything that I have that is 3D printed, I've got some gorgeous 3D printed models that we've painted, you know, for showing off on covers and stuff like that that we've done in the past. But, you know, I would never play with those because I'd be afraid they would fall over and could be breakable. With that said, though, the resins have gotten much better. And there are some really good resins out there that are not super breakable, and they've got a little flex and stuff into them too. So the more inexpensive 3D printers that are out there are some really good resins right now that you can do things with. And I also think that there are some, our models they've been described a little bit as chunky. We exaggerate the detail a lot. But I think I put a little less detail because I would rather have all the detail that we put on it pop, as opposed to trying to put so much stuff it becomes soft and gets muted and disappears when things are going through. So there are things that I've seen 3D printed that I could 3D print that would be better than, at least on texture, than some other things that might be produced. However, they're not going to hold up in other ways, and they would never hold up in the manufacturing process. So there's always this balance between being able to see the detail at 2 feet away on a table, where it usually looks ridiculous on a screen because everything, the head's too big, the hand's too big, the sword's too big. If you look at, if I'm a student of other people's figures, I have a ridiculous collection of stuff from everybody. And I love looking at how they made it, how they did it, how things pop and everything else. And there are things that you can do in 3D printing that you simply cannot do in the manufacturing process unless you cut that guy up in 8 or 9 different pieces. So I know for us that, you know, when we do models that are multi-pieces, a lot of people prefer to have a model that you can just take and do something, you know, here it is, single piece, paint it like a game, like a tabletop model that you put down. I know for us that when we make our own models here in the house, if I am going to require a hobbyist to glue 2 pieces together because of the way we're doing it, then it shouldn't be 2 pieces that could have been put together and cast as one. It needs to be, what's the reason? The reason is because now it's super dynamic and you can do things that you can't get out of a mold the other way. Or, you know, why may I not put a head on somebody? Well, that's because I'm going to have 200 other heads available elsewhere that if you want to swap in the future, you can do that sort of thing. And if I tend to make somebody glue an arm onto somebody, often I put an extra arm with a different weapon or something on that same little sprue, just because if I'm going to force you to do something, it's fun to make that decision of what do I want my guy to look like.
My guy looks different than everybody else's.
So that's why I do that. And it's cool to paint things different, but I also know it's fun to post things. And I've always liked kit bashing and doing all that kind of stuff. So I try to make that as easy as possible. So I mean, even if you look at the you know, Catalyst Game Labs makes, you know, their BattleTech models, which are really cool. And we have been helping them working on their collector series stuff. And the difference between the stuff they're doing themselves and the collector series things that we've done in the past is kit bashability.
Yeah.
It's, we make it so the weapons can be, if you have a heavy mech here and a heavy mech here, guess what? Those sockets are probably the same.
Yeah.
So you could take one guy's weapon and move it to the other thing. So now you can start customizing things. You can swap bodies, you can swap feet, you can do all that kind of stuff. And to me, as a vintage guy, my hobby was doing stuff like that.
Yeah.
Some people's hobbies are collecting. Some people's hobbies are painting. Some people could care less about what their figure looks like, and they want to mid-max and crush their enemies and have been driven for them. So I try to appeal to as many people as I can.
Yeah. That
way, but saying people are selfish. I'm selfish. I want stuff that I like. Yep. So I tend to lean that way a little bit.
All right. So. Absolute final question, because it plays into what you were just talking about. Mom Gamer wants to know, what 3D printer would you recommend? If you don't have a specific one, maybe a price range that you should shoot for, or something to that effect. I don't know. But
honestly, right now, I wouldn't recommend anybody paying more than like $500-600 for resin print. Anycubic, the Anycubic 6K is a really good one. We have one of those here that we play with. We also have one of the who's the other company? I want to say Proto, the guys that make the 8K one. I forgot the name of it. It's sad that I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but I have like 15 printers in the back.
Yeah.
So I have a ridiculous collection.
Right.
And a lot of that is because, I'll buy when the first resin printer started coming out, and even now, every time that I see something that I think is a step up, we tend to buy one, because if we are going to start selling STLs, I want to print those models first here in-house. I want to see what that model looks like. What are they going to get from it?
Yep.
And one of the big things with the STL models is supports. People prefer to buy pre-supported models that will work in their particular thing. Problem is there are so many different slicers and so many different G codes. It's difficult to do the thing for all people. That goes all the way through. So most people, tend to sell models that haven't been pre-supported, or they pick, if Anycubic's the most popular one out there, and depending on, you pick one or two slicers that is going to work in that printer, then you will do your output for that and goes up. The problem is that if somebody gets the printer, you can't control the temperature of the resin. You can't control the resin they decided to use in the printer. So when you set up something that's pre-supported, most people tend to over-support it from a company point of view. They'll put so many supports on it that by the time you sit there and cut off these 300 little things, it looks like he's got the chicken pox. And there are things all over the place, and it's really, really hard to clean. So someone that's going to get into 3D printing, I highly recommend get into it in such a way that even if you were never going to make your own model, you need to absolutely understand how to support that figure.
Yeah.
And going back to Gamer Mom for her thing, I could tell you that inexpensive Anycubic 6K one that I have in the back, I have printed some gorgeous models off of that, and they've come out really, really good. Now it's got a relatively small build bed. So if you're trying to do helmets and stuff, that's never going to work, so then you need to get something bigger. I could tell you for here in house, I used to have, $100,000 3D systems printers, but everything we do in house, I'm using the Form 3 Pluses. Those are the printers that I'm using right now here. And I've got 3 of the small ones and 1 of the Form 3Ls in the back. And I am always experimenting with resins in them. I use the resins they have, but then we also do some proprietary stuff that we mix with them to try to get things a little stronger or change the color shift or do some other things with the resin as we're going through and doing it. Because we are literally printing probably 20, 30 models a day that we go through here. And a lot of the stuff that we print, we just print it just to see. It's what's great about being able to print your own stuff is that, especially if you're making it yourself, we might do 5 iterations of a model before we're happy with it, or I just don't like the way it fits, or I don't, or sometimes even though the model is perfectly correct in all of the proportions, you put it down, it just doesn't look right. Because at the end of the day, you look at it, you're like, he needs bigger arms. So you give him bigger arms, or you give him a bigger weapon, or the weapon's ridiculously big, so make it a little bit smaller. So, nothing goes from first attempt to delivery. Everything has been iterated. And because I am another fatal flaw of my perfectionism, I tend to spend way too much time on things. I have a hard time saying good enough. And I tend to strive, a lot of people say, hey, if you get it 90% of the way there, it's good enough, put it out there. And the effort required to go from 95 or from 90 to 95 is, in my opinion, twice the effort. And then to go from 95 to 97, it's twice the effort again as things. And that's how sometimes things get delayed on my side a little bit, is because I tend to do that. And then I forget, everything we do, in my opinion, is super cool by the time it gets out there. And a lot of times I forget how cool it is because I'm too close to it. I stare at it all the time when things are going through. And I love it when people, even like you, like when you came back and you walked through the office for the first time, you're like, maybe what we do is cool. Because you don't realize how cool it is because you stare at it all the time.
You're always there.
Oh my God, what is this? Or Len, when he comes through, he goes, I'll take one of those. How are you throwing that away? I'm like, dude, it's a version 2. We're up to version 9. No, can I have it out of the garbage can? No, you cannot. Stay away. And I remember that from my days when I would visit Games Workshop. Because I remember going back to the metal room. And one of the coolest things that ever happened when I was younger and went back and I was visiting Sean and those guys was, hey, we're going to go back to the metal room and grab 3 kilos of metal. Do you want to come with us? I'm like, yeah, I do. And you just like, it's just a ridiculous of how much cool stuff is back there. And I still prefer metal. I still prefer the feel, the weight, but there is no one who can argue that, with the new resins and the new plastics and the new technology that people are doing in 3D printing, we are absolutely in the renaissance right now of miniatures. There has never been better miniatures, in my opinion, out in the world for people to pick and choose. Pretty much everything that you could possibly think of exists. And if it doesn't, there are people and computers and soon AI that's going to give it a shot and get it there. So, all I can really do is try to make a really consistent range of stuff that I would enjoy playing with and my friends, and hope that everybody else likes it too.
That's awesome. That's great. That's a very cool business model too, because it ensures that it doesn't become work in that mindset. It's always fun because you're doing something that you enjoy doing and other people think it's cool. So that's great. All right. Well, we're about 15, 20 minutes over our hour time. So we're going to go ahead and sign off here. Again, I want to say thank you to John for doing this. And I want to thank everybody out there for joining us as well. But we're going to get on out of here. So we thank you.